Today on What Matters, we're stepping back from individual projects and technologies to talk about the energy transition as a system, one that's evolving faster than most institutions, regulators, and even markets are prepared for. Solar batteries are scaling at an incredible pace. Electricity demand is rising for the first time in decades. Data centers, electrification, and digital infrastructure are reshaping how power systems behave and forcing us to rethink what resilience, reliability, and planning really mean. To help us make sense of all of this, I'm joined by someone who spent more than 2 decades looking at energy through the lens of finance, markets, and system change, and who wasn't always convinced solar would play the role it does today. Gerard Reid is co-founder and partner at Alexa Capital, where he focuses on mobilizing capital towards net zero and sustainable energy projects. He's also the co-host of Redefining Energy podcast, where he explores how finance, technology, regulation, and innovation reshape the global energy landscape. Gerard, welcome to our show.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Before we dive in, for our listeners who may not know your full background, how do you describe what you do today?
I describe myself really as being in between energy, technology, finance, and geopolitics. And really, what I'm all about is just trying to make sense of the future for people and help people make better decisions. And I've got lots of different interests in those areas. I'm a founder of a corporate finance business, also have a strategy business, and I'm involved in various different things. But the key thing, it's really all about, helping people, as I said, make better decisions in the future in this, I think, increasingly complex world.
You really do bring a rare perspective, and I'm very excited to dive into what energy transition looks like when you zoom out and connect the dots. You've been quite open about the fact that you were initially skeptical of solar. What were you skeptical about, and what ultimately changed your mind?
What I was skeptical about really was the ability to get costs down quickly. And where I was coming from this is 20 years ago. Don't forget, we've actually had solar panels for over 50 years, right? But sort of nothing happened in the space, and I just didn't really see a path. When I went to see a solar factory in Berlin 20 years ago, I really just didn't see the ability to be able to get the cost down. But I didn't understand what was going on, if I'd be really honest. What I saw was a group of people who were making modules, and they were doing this by hand, and I just thought, this is a joke. So that's where I was coming from. Now, I was thankfully able to listen to people who knew more than I did and convince me otherwise. And here we are 20 years later, and it really is the lowest cost form. I'm not even just saying electricity, of energy out there, right? You're just not going to get anything lower cost, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. And honestly, I think it sounds like that evolution sort of mirrors what we've seen across finance more broadly. There's early doubt that is followed by a rapid reassessment once the data becomes a little bit more impossible to ignore.
Yeah, and listen, I go back, and if you look at the history of solar, we talk about a solar coaster, as in a roller coaster. It's up, down, right? And listen, I've seen, I don't know how many up, down cycles I've seen at this point down, but maybe it's every 3 or 4 years you have another upcycle or another down cycle, right? Now, the good news today is solar's in a much more sustainable position than it's ever been because its costs are so low. And also what's increasingly happening is you do have facilitating technologies alongside it. Now, for me, the facilitating technologies would be batteries, power electronics, stuff like this, that just make it much easier to integrate solar into a wider system. So that's sort of why it's in a much better position than it's ever been, really.
And at some point, you also shifted from seeing solar as a niche solution to calling it the bedrock of the future energy system. What was the moment or realization that led you to that shift?
Well, the bedrock really is what's your foundation of an energy system. If we really look globally today, the foundation of our energy system is really oil. And what actually happens is every time you have an industrial revolution, you do have a new form of energy that takes over. So you had the first industrial revolution, and we really moved from wood to coal. Okay, but then alongside coal, you had the steam engine, and then we had internal combustion engine. Obviously, it needed oil. And now what we've got is electrification and an AI, I would say, at this point in time, digitalization. All our technologies need electricity. They don't need oil. So that's the big shift. But the other shift is it's the lowest cost form of producing a usable form of energy. And that's the key difference, because you can't stop that. Because the thing that's really interesting for me about solar is the fact that you can use it anywhere. And of course you can say, oh my God, but we don't have a lot of sun in Northern Europe. Yeah, so what? I mean, talk to the plants in the back garden, in your back garden or your front garden about that. And they go, well, listen, we're quite happy. We survive with this, sun only being here, whatever it is, 8 hours a day in winter. So I don't take that argument because I just think what happens is you adapt. It's all about low cost and flexibility. That's what solar has.
I agree. Yeah, it's funny how quickly that perception changed. And almost before many people even realized it was happening, the costs fell faster than almost anyone had forecasted, deployment scaled globally, and then suddenly solar wasn't just a technology story, it was a system story.
Yeah, and I want to say, I only think we're at the beginnings of that system story, because if I take let's call the Western world, North America, Europe, what we've got there is you're replacing an old system. That's more difficult. But okay, if I go to Pakistan, I'm not replacing an old system. What I'm doing is I'm bringing power to my people. And you can't stop it in that environment because people want to have a better life. And a better life for your kids means you need to have electricity and you need to have internet. They're the basic things you want if you want your kids to have it. So guess what you do? You've got to put solar on your rooftop, right? And even if you've only have electricity for 8 hours a day, it's better than zero, right? And if you add batteries in there, it goes into. So I think really the big story of solar is only starting. But it's a different story. It is creating an energy system where solar is the bedrock.
I agree. And how has your background in investment banking and capital markets shaped how you look at the energy transition compared to, say, from a purely technical or policy lens?
Okay, so if you're a scientist or an engineer, what you're interested in is physics, and you're interested in efficiencies, and you're looking at it from a first principle point of view, right? As a finance person, I'm looking at it from. I also think what first principles. They probably tell it's second principles, but for me, it's economics. Does it make economic sense? Because if the physics is great and the economics makes no sense, it ain't going to scale. So I really look at the economics of stuff. That's what I really, really focus on. In every single technology, I always think, does this make economic sense, or could this in the future make economic sense? And I think that's the key thing that you focus on. Just keep focused on the economics, economics, economics. So I give you a very practical example. If I take the case of hydrogen, green hydrogen, it's really difficult for that to compete in a market with brown hydrogen, right? It's very difficult. Maybe it's even next to impossible. And you sort of argue, okay, do we really need to do that? Are people really willing to pay for that? They're the questions that I ask. And that means that I constantly focusing on what's the best economic decision. That's what I'm trying to do in everything that I'm looking at. Don't necessarily get it right all the time, because again, you're looking at the future all the time, and you have to make some form of, but I think a lot of people don't do that. What they do is they get carried away with a story. And stories may be how you get some capital in the door, but stories are not how you create the future. You create the future by really bringing something at low cost to market. That's how you create the future.
Yeah, I really like that framing, because capital in the end has a way of revealing the truth. Money moves towards what scales and away from what doesn't. Yeah. And you've mentioned solar and batteries before. So when you talk about this energy revolution, now we rarely talk about solar alone. It's really solar plus batteries. Why is this pairing so critical these days?
So first and foremost, storage has always been a critical part of our energy system. Let's start with the basics of how we live our life every day. The most important storage device I have is probably my fridge. Okay, that's what I'm doing. I'm keeping my food there, which I use every day, right? But if you go beyond that, in the fossil fuel world, we've got massive amounts of storage that we've built up over the last 100 years, right? We've got oil tanks, we've got gas tanks, we've got oil tankers that transport that. So we got massive capabilities to do it. So storage is, to all of us, it's clear, storage is a clear part of the energy system. Electricity is slightly different. There's not a huge amount of electricity storage out there, because what you have to do is you have to take that electricity and convert it into another form of energy. So, you push it up with water and bring it back down as pumped hydro or something like that. And we realized in the past, probably easier just to rely on the fossil fuel storage. In other words, what you do is when you need more electricity, you just, you take that coal in the bunker and you burn more of it. That's sort of what we've been doing. But in a world of renewables, where renewables is so low cost, and where, the reality is, because it makes so much economic sense for people to put more and more solar in the system, whether it be in the home or wherever it is. You then have periods of excess. Then you go, well, what's the most efficient and cost-effective way to do it? And that's to use a battery. And that's the reality of it, right? You could put it up the wall, you could put it up a mountain, or you could do something like that, but it's more expensive, and you've got inefficiencies in terms of the efficiency. The losses that you have are higher. So, and in particular, in the case of lithium ion is, I do use a story that nothing happened in batteries between probably 1900 and about 2010, and then we had lithium ion. And obviously lithium ion is in, every device that we have has a lithium ion battery in it, and they're getting better and better. And also then we've also got new forms of batteries, which are lower cost, higher performance coming our way as well. So that battery revolution continues. But the thing that really lends itself to batteries with solar is the fact that every day the sun goes up and the sun goes down. And when it's down, that means you always have potential to actually use any excess that you've saved to the time when the sun is not there. So you can do this you can bank on this every day. Let me contrast that with, say, wind or hydro. Wind, you have no idea what's going to happen, because what often happens is wind comes in fronts, and these fronts could be with you for 2 or 3 days. So that means is I go, hey, I'm going to take this storage, I'm going to save it for night. It don't work with wind, because you might have to save it for 3 days. Now that's okay. You save it for 3 days, but with solar it's much easier. You save it until it's dark. Okay. The exact same thing you would also say with hydro as well, right? If you use hydro as well, the same thing. You say, okay, I'm going to save it. You could do that, but it's, there are better ways of doing it, as what I would say. So that's why I say it really does lend itself to solar as opposed to other technologies. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I think this distinction matters a lot, especially when people still talk about these technologies as if they're optional add-ons. Really, with solar without storage, you have generation, but solar with batteries, you do have like a real infrastructure.
Exactly.
Now, you often emphasize the need for a systemic view of energy transition. Can you unpack what that really means and why focusing on one technology in isolation can be misleading?
Yes. What you have is, don't forget, again, I'm going to go back to the Western world, because the Western world, what we've got is a whole pile of technologies that are used out there in the system. So you've got fossil fuels. We already have electricity. And I'm sort of saying, well, the future is based on solar. Then the question is, how do you get there? And should you get there? And does it make economic sense? And what we end up doing is we make changes all across this system, and we just make it more and more complex. And what this means is we end up with unforeseen consequences. And even when we do see the consequences, we don't act. So I give you a very simple example. The Spanish blackout that took place last year.
I was actually there at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Every grid operator in Europe has been talking about, really behind the scenes, that we would have this type of event. Okay. Some have been preparing for it and some haven't. The Spanish have not been. Okay. Let's be really clear on that. Now, that is a criticism of the Spanish grid operator and the regulator. But the point is, we know what's going on, and I can go on and give a really simple example. I'm in Ireland today, and if I go back 12 months ago, Ireland had a storm that came in, and a large part of West Ireland lost power for whatever it was, a day and a half. Some people lost it for much more than that. And it's like shock horror. Ireland had a storm. I go, we've always had storms. It's always had storms. Number one. And number two, all the climate models have been saying for 15 years that the storms in Ireland will get more severe. So didn't prepare. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, even where there were consequences that we could foresee, the powers that be haven't made the changes that need to be made. Then we talk about unforeseen consequences. Foreseen is something you just couldn't predict. So I'll give you a very, very practical example of that. We had a whole series of nuclear power plants in France last summer that had to close because of jellyfish. Now, you go, what the hell are jellyfish doing? What jellyfish were doing was they were congregating in and around the water inlets for cooling the plants. Okay? Now, why am I saying that? Well, the reason jellyfish are there is because the waters are getting warm. warmer, right? And again, unforeseen, something we haven't, there's so many unforeseen consequences. So the only way you can really think about this is, I think, is to really think of this at a very, very systematic level. And a systematic level is, where do we want to go is the first question. Where do we want to go? And then the question is, what's the best way to get there from both an economic and a societal point of view? And I don't see this anywhere in the world. What I see is it's what you've got is regulators saying one thing, governments saying another, and this, and it's being pulled, you're being pulled in every different direction. And as I said, it just gets more and more complex. And this is not helpful to producing a low cost energy system that is suitable for our future. That's where I come from.
Yeah, that's really a helpful way of thinking about it, because we're often debating about pieces of the puzzle without really stepping back to look at the whole picture. And we could really say that we don't have a technology problem. What we have is a coordination problem.
Exactly. It's a good way of putting a coordination problem. And I know it's difficult to coordinate all the different parties, but I'd also call, like, let's take in the case of Europe, if you really want to go and move forward with stuff, I think what you have to sort of put together is, I call it a Future Energies Commission that really has teeth and that can actually go and that can make change happen across Europe. Now, that's maybe a pipe dream for me, but I'm going back to what I briefly said earlier on was, we're in an industrial revolution, and this is probably the biggest industrial revolution in the history of mankind. And that industrial revolution is AI and electricity, right? And so you could do two things. You can become a Luddite and you can block all of this, but good luck to you on that, because what you're doing is you're putting all of us in the future into a very economically weak situation, right? So then the question is what to do. That's where I'm coming from when I'm thinking about this, right? And by the way, I spend an awful lot of my time really thinking about AI and what it does and what it doesn't do, because it's the speed of change in that area is just so quick. And it's not going to slow down, right? And yeah, that's where I'm coming from in all this. This industrial revolution is quicker than any industrial revolution we've ever seen. The steam coal revolution took 150 years. The automobile revolution, maybe it took 50 years, right? This is not going to take 50 years. This is a 10-year revolution, right?
But somehow for me, the irony is striking, because we have cleaner, cheaper technologies available, but then crisis planning still sort of defaults to 20th century. Now, you mentioned the power outage in Spain. I know Berlin had some outages last week or a couple of weeks ago. Boulder, Colorado also had some. So what do these moments really tell us about grid resilience?
I'm going to just say they're warning signs to all of us, okay? And we have to heed these warnings. So, and I give a very practical example of this, right? There have been physical attacks on transformers in the United States. And what did the United States do? All the states get together, all the energy regulators, all the utilities, and they say, okay, we need to support each other if there's an attack on one of these pieces of critical infrastructure. That means they have strategies in place in case there's an attack on one of these pieces of critical infrastructure. There's nothing like that in place in Europe, okay? And I'm going to say totally unacceptable. And I really, really would say totally unacceptable, because the issue is the risks if something goes wrong are just so big, because society will, as we know it, in a major city, collapse if you don't have power for 3 days, okay? That's the reality of the world we live in. So accept this. Don't run away from it. Accept it. And then you have to go and change your approach to how you run that system. Because then you go and say, okay, what are the risks in this system? And what are the major ones? And how do I deal with those risks if a horrendous event takes place? What do I do? How do I react? And how do I get the system back running as quickly as possible? Okay, that's it. Have these open conversations. And by the way, that's also systemic thinking, because that requires people to be really open and honest about this, and rather than hiding the threats and the weaknesses of the system as it is, that's where I'm coming from.
100%.
So maybe I'd say the last thing I'd say, if I said to you today, I was running my businesses with faxes, you would break out laughing. You go, what are you talking about? And I go, okay, I can tell you the names of many grid operators that are still using faxes. And they'll turn around and they'll say it's more secure. Yeah, it's a bit slow, isn't it, for the world that we're in at present where, electricity is moving basically at the speed of light. And you're telling me you're waiting for your fax before you make a decision. I mean, come on. This is a joke. And if there's a grid operator here listening, they'll be cringing, going, "Oh my God, how dare he say this? He's not even an engineer." I mean, I go, listen, yeah, if you're an engineer, show us that you're an engineer and actually improve the situation and really come out there and deal with the risks around what you're doing for a job every day.
And I know that there's a lot of talk about microgrids and distributed generation as a way forward. How important do you think this is for decentralization to build real resilience?
Anybody who's in the systems theory area will tell you that the best form of systems are decentralized, right? That's the reality of it, right? If you have a centralized system with just, a small number of connections, well, that's a pretty weak system, right? So the more redundancy you can have in the system, the better. But redundancy really it's about this whole idea, I would say, of being able to island a system. An island for me is if the power system in Norway goes out, let's assume that it goes out. That will be felt across Europe, okay? Because we're all connected in together. So it goes out. So then the question is, can Sweden protect itself from that? Can Denmark protect itself from that? Now, let's go back to the Spanish situation. Portugal was not able to islandize its grid when they had problems in Spain. Okay? So that's not very resilient either from the Portuguese. So the question is, what can you do in these extreme situations to make sure that these systems stay stable? And I said this at a national level, but then, well, what happens at the local level as well? So if you take the case of Berlin, obviously part of Berlin, one cable in West Berlin is taken out and there's no power in that region for 5 days. That ain't very resilient because you have to ask, well, why did that region not have another cable coming in that's going to supply the power, right? Or if you knew about that one cable coming in and the importance of it, then the question is, why would you not put a battery in there to deal with it, right? To make sure that if something happens, you still have backup power or whatever it is there in case, right? Or by the way, you protect that cable. You keep a camera on it because you know it's your weak point. Because the reality is there's a whole pile of websites out there where I can go in and I can go and look at the distribution, transmission grids, the gas grids. I can look at critical infrastructure and I can see exactly where things are. That's the reality. So let's face reality. There are people out there, bad actors, and they go in and do and see all this. So, that's the world we're in. So you have to deal with that, okay? And again, it goes back to the reality is that you can't do it with electricity. And by the way, that's only a minor situation, I would say. It's a part of Berlin, right? 100,000 people without electricity. That's not 3 million people in Berlin without electricity for 3 days or 5 days.
Then
you'd see what happened in the winter. Then you'd see what would happen, right? Then you'd have the German government falling. That's what you would have, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it all comes down to just, as you say, those islands and just making sure that everything is a little bit more intelligently connected, I would say.
Good way of putting it. Absolutely.
I guess from a financial market perspective, what are the biggest risks and opportunities in solar, storage, and clean energy today from your point of view?
So let's start with the risk. So it's good news, get the bad news out of the way. The biggest risk is the fact that we've got in regions across the world. Again, I could take the case of Pakistan, I could take the case of Europe, take the case of Texas. You have at periods of the day, you have too much electricity in the system. And the too much electricity in the system means that prices collapse down to zero, or they might even go minus. In that type of environment, if I got a solar system and I'm hoping to get 30 euros or 40 euros for it, I'm getting zero, then I'm in trouble. So I might be the lowest cost form of electricity generation, but nobody wants my electricity on a June day at 12 o'clock. That's the biggest risk is that what we're really seeing is this. And by the way, let's talk about the first phase of renewables was build to replace fossil fuels. Okay, that was fine. And we subsidize it, this, that, and the other, but we The next phase is not about that. The next phase is about producing low cost electricity for people, right? And don't get me wrong, solar, wind, all these are a very big part of that. But the business model is going to change. So just take the case of, say, solar. You're definitely going to see more behind the meter. You know, in other words, at home, in our businesses, on our rooftops, in our gardens, and you connect them with a battery, okay, or in with storage, right? You can see this very, very, very clearly. That's where we're going. And I can see if you take large scale systems, the same thing is, well, why would you could say we can have the German government or whichever government it is financing us to build more and more solar. And you go, well, why would you finance someone to build more of something when the price is going to be zero? So that requires us to either you stop subsidizing or actually you change the way the market works. In other words, enable the customer to benefit from the fact that there's a load of solar on a sunny day every weekend and allow them benefit. And how do you do this? You can be let's be really think radically about it. Let's think creatively about it. If you look what's going on in Australia, what are they going to do? They're going to give away electricity when there's too much solar in the system. Okay, so let me give you one. So why would we not say to our industry across Europe, guys, every weekend you've got free electricity during the day. Okay, it's either that or you have too much of it, and you pay someone to take it. You curtail it. So I think we need to be creative in our solutions in and around this. We have to, rather than over regulating it, just be a little bit more creative. So I'd say that's it. I go back to the risk is financing solar and renewables is now more difficult than what it was because you don't have this long-term PPA, call it a feed-in tariff or whatever it is. You don't have that in place anymore. There's something else there. And this requires everybody in the industry to change, I think rightfully so, because this is called growing up. And maturing, right? Growing up and maturing. So that's what's going on. That's the risk. If you ask me what's the opportunity, the real opportunity again is how do you integrate storage and other forms of generation in and around solar? I think that's really the thing that I really think about in a different way. And again, I'm going to start with solar because it's the lowest cost one. And it's the one that you can't block. I can block offshore wind by just saying no to it. You're not going to be able to block solar because that customer who generates electricity at 10 cents using solar on his rooftop is going to keep doing it because guess what? The electricity in the grid is 30, and that's why you can't, and just be really clear, that's why you can't block it. Then we've got balcony solar and a whole pile of stuff. So plug and play solar is there, so you can't block this. So that's why I say it's all based in and around that. And I think that's the most exciting thing in and around this. And it also means that, let me call it, the optimization of these assets becomes really important. What I mean by that is trading the asset. These assets, the solar asset's going to be around for 40 years. Okay, so I have a power purchase agreement for 8 years. Well, what do I do after year 8? There's a whole pile of creativity that's needed in and around what you do with this going forward. And that, I said to me, is the area where I think is very exciting. And I think ultimately, I do think the future of this is going to be a large part in developing countries. So I'm going to go and talk about the global south. Unbelievable what's going there. Or, just take Australia, in terms of their whole system is being turned upside down because the customer wants solar because it is cheap. That's sort of where you have to look at if you want to get an understanding of what's happening or what's not happening in this space,
That's really a great point. I think it's often not the technology that trips people up, but it's all of the assumptions around it. Now, if you could change one major thing, let's say policy, market design, regulation, to accelerate the transition, what would it be?
I would enable the system to be flexible. And what I mean by flexible is that we need to get the customers involved in this energy transition in a much more active way than they are at present. Now, it doesn't mean that the customer has to decide, hey, I need to, oh, good, look, the power prices are low. I'm going to switch off my refrigerator and I got to put on my air conditioner. That's not what I mean. It's enabling that so that what can happen is an energy service customer can come into you and do this for you, right? And manage it and give you, and do it as a energy as a service type thing, all this. That's the really, really interesting thing is to enable that. What does that mean to enable flexibility? Well, that means to be able to allow storage into the system as quickly as possible, right across it. Secondly, to remove all barriers in and around solar and generation generally in the home. Make sure you have smart meters in place to enable this. And then basically to allow aggregators to be able to take all this demand and energy and use it in a different way. And I forgot as well, it's very important to be using electric cars. I mean, you've got these 100 kilowatt hour batteries just sitting there. So use them, all right? How can we use them? We should be using them for backup power, right? Okay, you have a blackout. Guess what? You've got your car you can plug in. Brilliant. Okay, you can use it in the power system, do smart charging, enabling all of this smartness in and around, particularly the demand side. And to do this almost without the customer knowing. And I will give a vision of the future. For me, every device in our homes in the next years will have a battery in it. The reason they'll have a battery in it is because it makes economic sense. Now, what's really interesting is if you look at the white good manufacturers already, I'm talking Samsung, LG, Panasonic, what do they do as well? They do batteries. Guess what? They do batteries. It's very obvious that they put these into devices. I mean, you think of a smart TV today, Samsung smart TV today. I have control of that. I have it, I can do different things with it. You can see where I'm coming from with devices. They might, instead of them selling you a refrigerator, they sell you as cooling as a service. They say, okay, don't buy the refrigerator for me. What you do is you pay €10 a month. And by the way, you might laugh and go, oh, there's no way you're going to do that. Well, okay, I can go back and say to you, that's what we do with mobile phones. Sorry, right? And you could maybe say 20 years ago, we wouldn't have done it, but we do. Service models is what people understand and it makes sense to them, right? And then what happens is, I'm just making sure it's all working for me. I don't need to think about it. It's, I think, the world we're going through. So that means you've got a whole pile of actors that are able, with their devices, to make sure that and their services to make sure that the customer is involved in being part of the solution in and around making sure that we electrify in a low cost, efficient way. That's where we're going from. And by the way, you have resilience in the system when you do that.
I really couldn't agree more. I think sometimes progress isn't about inventing something new. It's more about removing the friction. So as you say, just making things a little easier.
Agreed.
This has really been a powerful conversation, not just about solar storage, but about how the entire energy system is being written in real time. The takeaway for me is clear. The transition is moving faster than most institutions are prepared for, and the winners will be those who understand the system and not just the technology.
It's a good way to end it. I agree with you on that. Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your perspective and challenging us to think bigger. If our listeners want to follow you or wish to dive deeper into finance, policy, clean energy, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest thing to do. But you can also, I just recently set up a Substack as well, so I'm on that as well. And also the other thing then is you can find me through podcast Redefining Energy, which comes out every week. I'm quite happy to talk to people that are interested in pushing the energy transition. And as I said, that are in need of the help of somebody like myself that can, just help them. I'm really interested, as I said, in helping businesses really scale in and around this energy transition. That's what I get up and excites me about it, We're in a revolution and I want to be part of the revolution, I don't want to be the one that's run over by the revolution.
For sure. Well, I'm sure they will be. You will have people connecting with you soon. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to What Matters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. What Matters is powered by PVKs, the platform trusted by solar professionals around the globe. If you never want to miss out on insights that keep solar projects moving forward, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're interested in learning more about streamlining your solar project needs, visit pvks.com for more info. Until next time.